Do you know where your officers are?
This is my series to dissect films, not to tear them down for sport, not to prop them up out of loyalty, but to sit in that uncomfortable middle space where intention collides with execution. This is where movies that almost worked come to be examined honestly, and few modern horror films live in that space more awkwardly than Spiral from the Book of Saw. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a promise to you viewers right now. For the rest of this video, I'm going to refer to this film only as Spiral, because that whole title is long, withdrawn, and bullshit. Let's get comfortable, y'all. This is a movie people don't usually say they hate out loud. They say things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "It was different," or my personal favorite, "I appreciate what they were trying to do." Those aren't compliments, those are defenses, and defenses usually exist because something didn't land the way it was supposed to.
You can take that to the bank.
Spiral is a film that wanted to reinvent a franchise without fully understanding why that franchise survived as long as it did. It wanted to modernize Saw, intellectualize it, and strip it of what it believed was excess. In doing so, it exposed exactly how fragile the Saw identity really was once you remove its central spine. Saw is a franchise that, in my opinion, is great, and it also helped to keep horror strong and successful in the 2000s, along with another franchise that, well, let's just say I watch out for airplanes, log trucks, roller coasters, and tanning beds. And I don't even use tanning beds. Spiral is not a movie that fails because it's lazy. Spiral fails because it is overconfident. It believes it understands Saw better than the audience does, and it believes that removing familiar elements will somehow elevate the experience rather than hollow it out. And that is why so many people walked away confused rather than enraged. Confusion lingers longer than anger. Confusion is harder to shake. Enter director Darren Lynn Bousman, tasked with changing the direction of the hyper-successful franchise. The question is, would fans dig it, or would they suffocate from hating it more than Captain Angie Garza did when she got covered in boiling hot wax? Let's get down to brass tacks. So get ready to distrust every cop in your precinct. Wonder if these traps are worthy of the damn franchise. See Samuel L. Jackson saying motherfucker and pointing guns at people while losing his shit. And never trust the new guy, cause there's no way that he won't eventually stab you in the back. Here are the reasons why you hate Spiral. Number 1, story. Chris Rock is a fan of the franchise and pitched the idea to Lionsgate. As a result, they made him one of the lead actors, a co-writer, and executive producer. He initially contacted the studio, who put him in touch with the producers. They, in turn, contacted writer Josh Stolberg and told him to make it happen. Both Stolberg and co-writer Pete Goldfinger worked with Rock starting from his original setup. He wanted to see what would happen if he, his character, woke up handcuffed to a pipe and was asked to cut off his own hand to escape. According to Rock, there are 2 films that were the big inspiration for this film, and they are Seven from 1995 and 48 Hours from 1982. But in order to secure the R rating, the film had to be submitted to the MPAA 11 times. Now, that kind of reminds me of one of our favorite franchises at a camp, doesn't it? All other attempts resulted in a rating of NC-17, but finally Spiral got the go-ahead. The film opens with an idea that immediately signals its ambition. This is not a Saw movie about random victims. This is a Saw movie about systems, about institutions, about corruption hiding in plain sight. From its first major set piece, the film makes it clear that the killer's focus is not moral failure in the abstract, but moral rot embedded in law enforcement itself. The story centers on a city police department riddled with misconduct, silence, and generational corruption. The traps are not being used to punish personal sins like addiction, infidelity, or cowardice. They are being used to expose the abuse of power. This is Saw repositioned as social commentary, and on paper, that is not a bad idea. In fact, it's the most logical evolution the franchise could attempt in a post-true crime, post-police violence cultural landscape. The problem is not the concept. The problem is the way the story delivers it. Spiral structures itself like a police procedural first and a horror film second. It wants the investigation to feel grounded, methodical, and contemporary. This choice slows the film down considerably, not because slow pacing is inherently bad, but because Saw as a franchise has always thrived on momentum. The story here pauses frequently to explain, contextualize, and redirect, creating an experience that feels more like an episode of a prestige crime drama than a horror film built on dread. As the bodies begin to accumulate, the film insists on framing each discovery through institutional response. Meetings are held, suspects are discussed, power dynamics are reinforced. The killer becomes less of a looming presence and more of a narrative function designed to advance a thesis. The story is not asking you to fear what comes next, it's asking you to consider what the killer represents. That intellectual framing is where Spiral begins to lose part of its audience. Saw fans did not come to the franchise for allegory first. Allegory was always present, but it was delivered through extremity. Spiral reverses that balance, putting the message ahead of sensation, and in doing so, it drains urgency from the story. The film's mystery is structured in a way that telegraphs its destination far earlier than it should. The narrative places heavy emphasis on legacy, mentorship, and inherited trauma, which are strong thematic ideas, but the execution lacks misdirection. Instead of building a labyrinth where the audience feels lost, the story moves in straight lines, trusting that thematic weight will compensate for predictability. What makes this especially frustrating is that Spiral believes it is being clever by distancing itself from previous Saw mythology. The film treats the absence of John Kramer as a creative liberation. It wants the audience to believe that the franchise no longer needs its original architect. But the story never replaces Kramer's philosophical gravity with something equally compelling. The killer's motivation is clear, but clarity is not the same as fascination. Saw worked best when its morality felt warped, but internally consistent. Spiral's story presents morality as rigid. Corrupt cops are bad, silence is complicity, punishment is inevitable. These are not controversial ideas, but they are delivered without the unsettling ambiguity that once defined the franchise. The story tells you what to think rather than forcing you to wrestle with it. As the investigation unfolds, the film leans heavily on coincidence and convenience. The story wants to reach its conclusion efficiently, and that efficiency robs the film of paranoia. There is no sense that anyone could be next. The targets feel predetermined, and that predictability erodes suspense. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of Spiral's story is how detached it feels from fear. The traps do happen, the consequences are severe, but the story does not allow the dread to breathe. Each sequence is quickly followed by procedural cleanup. The film does not linger in the psychological aftermath. It moves on as if it's afraid that stillness might expose how thin the tension really is. And by the time the narrative approaches its endgame, the story has already shown its hand. The thematic reveal is clear long before the literal one arrives. Instead of a gut punch, the climax feels like confirmation. The story resolves its thesis rather than detonating it. Spiral wants to be the most mature Saw film. In trying to grow up, it forgot that maturity in horror does not come from seriousness alone. It comes from restraint, from atmosphere, and from trust in the audience's ability to sit with discomfort without being lectured. The story of Spiral is not a failure of ambition, it's a failure of balance. It sacrifices mystery for message, momentum for meaning, and dread for discourse. And once those sacrifices are made, no amount of clever framing can restore what is lost. Number 2. Characters. Spiral hinges almost entirely on its characters because it deliberately strips away the safety net that the Saw franchise relied on for years. There is no John Kramer looming over the narrative. There is no mythology doing the heavy lifting. Without these elements, the film has no choice but to ask its characters to carry both the plot and the philosophy. That is a dangerous gamble, and Spiral never quite wins it. At the center of the film is Zeke Banks, played by Chris Rock, a character positioned as both protagonist and thematic lightning rod. Zeke is introduced as a man isolated within his own department, not because he's morally superior, but because he broke the unspoken rule of silence. He turned in a corrupt cop, and that decision defined the rest of his career. On paper, Zeke is an ideal modern Saw lead. He exists inside the system the film wants to critique, yet stands apart from it. He is not innocent, but he is willing to play along. The issue is not the concept of Zeke Banks. The issue is how the character is written and performed in relation to the film's tone. Zeke is abrasive, sarcastic, and openly hostile in a way that feels less like defensive armor and more like a performance the movie cannot fully justify. His humor does not relieve tension, nor does it sharpen it. Instead, it often feels at odds with the seriousness the film is striving for. Spiral wants Zeke to be the flawed truth-teller, but it frequently frames him as a disruptive presence without giving the audience enough reason to invest emotionally in his isolation. Even with all of that criticism, Chris Rock's performance is still admirable. To be quite honest, I enjoyed seeing him in a film like this, and I think he actually has a knack for it, if positioned correctly. I was rooting for him, and that's true. It's just, well, his character was out of balance at times with the story's rhythm. It's as simple as that. The character's backstory is central to the film's moral framework, yet it is delivered in fragments that never fully go together into depth. We are told that Zeke's decision to expose corruption cost him relationships, respect, and safety. What we are rarely shown is the internal cost of that choice. The film assumes that the audience will automatically sympathize with him because he did the right thing, but Saw has never been a franchise that operates on moral simplicity. By flattening Zeke's internal struggle, the film weakens its own ethical tension. Zeke's relationship with authority figures further complicates matters. His dynamic with the department changes between hostility and reluctant cooperation, but the film never commits to exploring the emotional fallout of that tension. Scenes that should crack open Zeke's psyche instead move quickly towards the plot advancement. The character is always in motion, always reacting, but rarely reflecting, and as a result, he becomes a conduit for information rather than a fully realized presence within the nightmare. The supporting cast suffers from a similar problem, though in different ways. Many of the officers exist primarily as symbols rather than actual people. They embody corruption, complacency, or cruelty, defined almost entirely by their worst actions. This is intentional on a thematic level, but it creates a disconnect on a dramatic one. When these characters face their fate, the film wants the audience to feel a mixture of justice and horror. What it often achieves instead is detachment. Saw villains and victims have historically been compelling because they are contradictory. They were flawed but human, guilty but vulnerable. Spiral's characters are more rigidly defined. Their moral alignment is clear long before they enter a trap. This removes ambiguity and with it discomfort. The audience is not forced to wrestle with conflicting emotions. They're guided towards judgment. The film introduces a generational layer through the presence of Zeke's father, a retired cop played by Samuel L. Jackson, whose legacy casts a long shadow. This relationship is meant to explore how corruption perpetuates itself through silence and normalization. It is one of the film's strongest ideas, yet it is handled with surprising restraint. Rather than digging into the emotional complexity of a father who embodies both protection and complicity, The film uses the relationship primarily as a narrative lever. The result is a missed opportunity to ground the story's broader critique in something deeply personal. Samuel L. Jackson is talented enough to be a character in any film genre, and he has shown that for many, many years. He does have some great moments in this, but his character was half-cooked at best. It seemed like he wasn't deemed important enough to be more layered. Captain Angie Garza, played by Marisol Nichols, was a firecracker, no doubt. And yes, she is absolutely Audrey Griswold from Vegas Vacation in 1997, and also Donnie in Scream 2. Remember, she jump-scared Cece, answered the phone when Ghostface was saying that he was Ted, gave the phone to Cece, and then she got the hell out of Omega Beta Zeta. She was a good character with cool scenes at the precinct. Her trap scene was among the best in the film. Good setup, design, and horrifying payoff. The antagonist, whose identity becomes increasingly apparent as the film progresses, represents the clearest articulation of Spiral's worldview. This character is not driven by chaos or spectacle. They are driven by resentment, grief, and a desire for systemic correction. Unlike John Kramer, whose philosophy was warped but obsessive, this new killer operates with a chilling sense of clarity. Their motivation is understandable, even relatable, and that is precisely where the film falters. By making the antagonist's logic so clean, Spiral removes the moral friction that made Saw unsettling. The audience is not asked to question the killer's reasoning so much as their methods. That distinction matters. John Kramer terrified audiences because his worldview was seductive and monstrous at the same time. Spiral's antagonist feels more like a radical reformer who has crossed the line rather than philosopher of pain whose logic corrodes from within. Performance plays a significant role in this imbalance. The antagonist's presence is controlled, subdued, and intentionally restrained. This restraint is meant to contrast with the extremity of the traps, but it also limits the character's psychological impact. There is no sense of obsession, no ritualistic madness, no escalation of belief. The character knows exactly what they want, and that certainty drains tension from every interaction. Even the victims who receive more screen time struggle to leave an impression beyond their function in the story. Their personalities are sketched quickly, often through dialogue that serves exposition rather than characterization. The film does not linger on their humanity long enough to make their suffering feel personal. This is a significant departure from earlier entries in the franchise, where even deeply flawed characters were given moments of vulnerability before being tested. What ultimately undermines Spiral's characters is not a lack of talent or intention, but a lack of contradiction. Everyone is exactly who the film tells us they are. The righteous are righteous, the corrupt are corrupt, the vengeful are vengeful. There is little slippage between the roles, little space for surprise. Horror thrives on instability, and Spiral's characters are too fixed to generate it. By the time the film moves towards its most brutal sequences, the emotional groundwork is already set in stone. The characters do not evolve in response to fear, they simply endure it, and endurance without transformation feels hollow. Number 3. The traps. In the Saw franchise, traps are not just spectacle, they are the language of the series. They communicate philosophy, hierarchy, cruelty, and intent without relying on dialogue. In the best entries, you understand the killer before they ever speak, simply by the way a trap functions. Spiral understands this legacy intellectually, but it misunderstands it emotionally. The traps in Spiral are designed to feel grounded, plausible, and institutionally themed. They are not elaborate death machines built in abandoned warehouses. They are brutal, direct punishments tied explicitly to professional misconduct. Each trap reflects a specific abuse of power, turning the victim's own actions into the mechanism of their suffering. On paper, this is one of the film's smartest decisions. The traps are no longer random tests of will, they are targeted indictments. Traditionally, Saw traps operate on anticipation. The audience is given time to absorb the rules, imagine the pain, and sit with the impossible choice before the violence escalates. Spiral short-circuits that process. Its traps are introduced quickly, explained efficiently, and executed almost immediately. There's very little time to dwell in the dread. And I definitely felt that when I first watched this film. I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, shouldn't this be teased out a little bit longer? Well, yeah, it should, but they didn't do it. The focus is on inevitability rather than possibility. This shift fundamentally changes how the traps feel. Instead of watching someone fight against a ticking clock, the audience watches someone realize that they are already doomed. Many fans, and that might be you, were not impressed overall with the traps, and I am in that same camp. Somehow, that vibe that I enjoyed in so many of the previous films was absolutely ditched here.
And you blew it! You blew it!
The killer uses a pig mask to hide their identity, similar to Jigsaw from the previous films of the franchise. However, their motives for choosing a pig is different. Jigsaw wore the pig mask because he started his work in the Chinese Year of the Pig. The killer in this film uses a pig as his mask and puppet, the mask paying homage to Jigsaw, while the puppet is alluding to the fact that the killer views the police officers as pigs. Another significant change is how the traps position the audience morally. Earlier Saw films often forced viewers into uncomfortable alignment with the killer's logic. You didn't want the victim to die, but you couldn't deny that their choices mattered. Spiral removes that discomfort. The targets are framed so clearly as villains that the traps become less ethical puzzles and more executions. The audience is not wrestling with conflicting emotions. They are waiting for a sentence to be carried out. William Shank, the killer, has a voice that went through numerous iterations, as the director didn't want it to sound like Jigsaw. He preferred something akin to a child's voice, which didn't work, and then they tried using Max Minghell's as well. They chose a monotone voice instead. I didn't really care much for the voice choice at all, and neither did many fans. It didn't have any type of menace to it. No fear, no dread, no respect, no trust. Liar. John Kramer's voice was and is still iconic. Tobin Bell is an absolute legendary icon. Let's take a look at the official Why You Hate body count, shall we? We have 8 deaths in Spiral. Detective Boswick, Charlie Emerson, the innocent driver, Detective Fitch, Captain Angie Garza, Pete Dunleavy, Benny Rates, and Marcus Banks. Number 4, Finale. By the time Spiral reaches its finale, the film has already made most of its decisions. The mystery has narrowed, the themes have been stated clearly, and the moral framework has been reinforced often enough that the ending no longer feels like a question mark. What remains is not suspense, but confirmation. And confirmation is a dangerous thing in a franchise built on disorientation. The reveal of the killer is not shocking because it's poorly executed. It is unshocking because the film has conditioned the audience to expect it. William Shank is the only victim whose trap is not explained via a full playback of the killer's tape. It is switched off before it gets to that point, nor is his death shown in a flashback. This foreshadows that he was the killer. Shank's reveal as the villain was somewhat compelling, but doesn't completely cross the finish line for me. His motive is understandable, if not a bit paper thin. His idea of Banks joining him actually works and was fun to watch, although they didn't go very far with it. Overall, he is a villain that I kind of enjoyed. Didn't really enjoy the reveal, but the film had so many issues that kind of betrayed him. Spiral spends so much time emphasizing legacy, mentorship, generational consequence, that the identity behind the mask feels less like a revelation and more like the final piece of a puzzle that was never meant to be difficult. In earlier Saw entries, finales were confrontational. They demanded that the audience sit with discomfort, ambiguity, and moral compromise. Spiral's finale offers clarity instead. It tells you exactly why this happened, exactly who is responsible, and exactly what the message is meant to be. And that level of transparency might work in a courtroom drama, but this is a horror film, guys. In a horror film, it drains all of the power away. The confrontation is staged with efficiency rather than menace. When we see Shank escaping and Chris Rock giving that huge outburst, which was absolutely awesome, by the way, the ending feels complete, and that completeness is precisely the problem. Horror thrives on residue. The best endings leave something unresolved, something that follows you out of the theater and into your thoughts. Spiral resolves itself too neatly. It does not infect the imagination. It does not fester. It concludes. At the end of the day, Spiral gave us a sequel that tried to break away from Jigsaw with a new take and a new killer, and it didn't fully land. So we as fans must deal with it in our own way. You have to ask yourself, did this film go in the right direction, or did it just suck? That is a question only you can answer. As always, this video is not here to make you love Spiral or to hate it. It's simply a discussion to highlight the history and aspects of it, good or bad, with you, the viewer. So what do you think? Are you a fan? If so, let us know. If not, let's discuss why you hate Spiral. If you haven't hit the like button for more content, please do. If you're not subscribed to the Night Watch Zone, this is the time to do it. Do it and become part of this fantastic community where you'll never love and talk about movies the same. If you like this video, check out my other Why You Hate videos and other content, including live streams here, and I'll see you there. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, you are the Night Watch. Peace.